been a friend of mine since 1998. When I first came into Parliament, I met him. I thought, geez, pretty bright. And then I actually had the pleasure of sharing an apartment with him up in Canberra for 2.5 years. And you get to know a bloke pretty well when you're sort of sharing up in Canberra, particularly after a hard day. He's a bloke that is a friend of mine. He's there when you need him. He's there when it counted. He was there when it counted during the global financial crisis. I am proud to call Kevin Rudd my friend. And so, without any further ado, I announce to help me open this trade training centre, my friend Kevin Rudd.
Well, good morning, guys. How are you? I bring you greetings from the People's Republic of Queensland. It's a foreign country just to our north. I'm here, as Anthony just said, because he's a friend. I have known him a long time. He's passionate about you guys and all that you do. I've shared an apartment with him. I can confide in with you. He's very messy. You'll clean up after you have a meal, do you guys at home? Who does the cleaning up? In our apartment, I do the cleaning up, you do the messing up. But that's by the by. I sit with him in the Parliament, we talk about your part of the world a lot. He brought me down here 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm very pleased to be back today. So thank you for the warmth of your welcome. Okay, which of you guys is from Hallam? Stick your hand up. Who's from Dubton? Thank you, Dubtonites. Who's from Endeavour Hills? Good on you. Fountain Gate? Harry Warren? Harry Warren South? Dandenong? Who have I missed out? And all those places too. Yes, Rob, I grew up in a part of Australia just like where you come from. It's called Nambour. Have you ever heard of it? Thank you. The reason you've never heard of it is because not many people have. It's a town with one school in those days, which was Nambour State High School. We had 1,500 kids. We had one trades block where we learned how to do technical drawing. I failed in my second year of technical drawing. That's no encouragement for you guys to fail in technical drawing. But you know something? I came from a part of Australia which nobody thought was important. Nobody thought was important. My message to you today is that every part of Australia is important. Dandenong's important, Harry Warren's important, Dubton's important, Hallam's important, Endeavour Hills is important, and Fountain Gate's important. When I was at Nambour High School and I went off to participate in some competitions in Brisbane, capital of Queensland, against the very flash private schools, you could almost see the look of contempt on their face as you arrived, as if you had come from a different planet. Have you ever had that experience? Guess what, guys? It's got no place in the 21st century. You are as good as any other kid in the country. And never let anyone say anything to you to the contrary. But on top of that, never let it go into your head. You know the great thing about Australia, and I've been around the world, having been working as Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, is that not only is this one of the best countries in the world, what makes it one of the best countries in the world is that every young person gets a fair start. You get to fulfill your dreams. You get to become who you want to become. You get to pursue your passions in life. The things that really light up your lives. Those things which make you want to bounce out of bed in the morning and do your hair like the guy sitting in front of me. Or him, even more creatively. There is a large market for those of you studying hairdressing. It's up the front here on the right. You know something? In this country, you can do anything. The job of government is to make it possible for you to do anything. That is why, when I came down here in 2007, and I haven't changed a bit since then, and I'm sure you haven't either. That was a little joke about me, by the way. I got a little bit older. Thank you for the delayed laughter. When I came down here in 2007, I saw a whole bunch of enthusiastic young people who wanted to make something of their futures, but there was one thing missing. You didn't have the first-class facilities to pursue a career in the trades of whatever description. You wanted to go to automotive, you wanted to go into hairdressing, you wanted to go into carpentry, you wanted to go into computer and graphic design. You didn't have the first-class stuff that you needed. My job was to help provide the first-class stuff that you needed. That's now over there. It's called the Hallam Valley Trades Training Centre. And guess what, guys? Just in case you think it's only you here who are near and dear to my heart, even though you are, we have built 370 of these across the nation, so that kids like you, in suburbs like the ones you live in centres like the ones you live in, including in Nambour, where I come from, now have first-class trades training centres because you deserve them. Let me tell you something about the importance of the trades. Any of you heard of a country called Germany? Thank you. It's on the other side of the world. I've been there a few times. Quite a lot, in fact. It's the fourth largest economy in the world. America first, China second, Japan third, Germany fourth. It is also either the first or the second largest exporter of manufactured goods to the world. It's a country of about 80 million people. And you might say, how on earth do they do that? I'll tell you how they do that. Within Germany, one of the most impressive economies in the world, they put as number one priority the training of young people in the trades. Number one priority. And when you go to Germany, in all the major towns of Germany, centres like this, the Hallam Valley Trades Trade Centre, are all over the place because they know their country's future depends on folk like you. So here's the message, guys. Number one, you're important. Number two, you can do anything with your futures. Number three, our job as a government is to make it possible for you to do anything with your futures. To give you the best facilities to train you that money can buy. And that's what we've done. But here's number four. Not only is this good for you and good for each of your professional and personal futures, guess what? You make Australia strong on the way through, just as the tradespeople of Germany have made their country one of the most envied economies in the world. So when you go out there and you decide, I'm going to work out how to fix, design, re-engineer an automobile, guess what? It's great for you and it's great for your country. You go out there and you pursue a career in graphic design, guess what? It's good for you, it lights up your lights, but it's equally good for the future of your country. If you go out there and you decide that you want to design the most beautiful creative garments and enter into the fashion industry, not only are you going to be an enormously creative and fulfilled person, you're going to add to Australia's standing in the world as well. So guys, here at Hallam Senior College, here at Hallam Valley Trades Training Centre, here in this part of Melbourne, represented by a fantastic bloke, Anthony Byrne, who I've been proud to count as a friend for 15 years, I am pleased to be here today to help open one of the pathways to your future and to Australia's future. Thank you.
I was proud to be part of a government that actually did do that protected our kids, that laid pathways for the future, that created opportunity. One of the great things of working with Kevin when he was Prime Minister was that it was about Australia's place in the world. It didn't matter where you come from, race, colour or creed, you could make a difference, you could realise your ambitions, you could realise your goals. We need to inject that back into the political discourse again. We're facing a challenging period of time as a country. We need to bring our country back together again. Our country is a divided country. Our country is an uncertain country. Our country needs people with a vision for the future, a vision about a united country where we are all Australians, we're all equal, we're all working together for the common good. I'm very proud that Kevin has come down here and I thank him for doing so. He's a guy that's made a difference. He's a guy that will continue to make a difference. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce my friend, Kevin Rudd. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And people should continue to munch delicately on their lunch because otherwise it'll get cold. Politics is a challenging business. There are two basic things in political life and political responsibility. Number one is to ensure that people are secure. Number two is to make sure that people have a job. If they are secure physically and they have a job to put money on the table and to bring bread home for the family, everything else can look after itself. There are other responsibilities of government which go beyond that, but if you're going to drill back to the absolute fundamentals, it's whether the country is secure and whether you have an economy which can make businesses grow and jobs created. I'm not here today to talk about national security. It's something which has been part and parcel of my life since I began as a career diplomat 30 years ago. What Anthony has asked me to talk about is the economy, because it's fundamental to that second task I referred to just before. Running an economy in the 21st century is not a straightforward business. The main reason is this. In the 21st century, the economies of countries are now fundamentally linked to all economies around the world. And therefore, what happens this afternoon on the FTSE in London will affect the viability of a firm in Dandenong tomorrow, if that happens to be the parent company. Or talking to friends at my table, if a major Chinese manufacturer goes bust and no longer is able to export its white goods and therefore no longer needs national distributors and logistics experts, then it affects employment and corporate well-being here. And so the interconnectedness goes on. There is practically no part of the Australian economy which is disconnected from what goes on in the world. Whether it's through the supply of finance, the price of finance, the confidence of business or the lack thereof, and on top of that, the volume of trade, the impediments to trade, and the other factors which shape the success or failure of firms on the ground. Firstly, a few points about where we've been in recent years, then a few points about where we're up to right now, and then finally some thoughts on the future. Anthony's just talked about the global financial crisis. It's worth reflecting how that has shaped this interconnected world of ours over the last 5 years. It's worth saying that we have had the most disrupted global economy at any stage since either the Second World War or the Great Depression of the early 1930s that we have had in the last 5 years. What is called around the world the Great Global Recession, a term not used in Australia because we avoided it. The Great Global Recession is still affecting the economies of Europe. America only in the last quarter has started to come out of it, and the economies of Asia in large part have been significantly hit by it, although China has remained a strong engine of growth. I remember sitting down a month or two after being elected as Prime Minister and saying to the Secretary of the Treasury, Ken Henry, "Ken, I'm reading the Financial Times. I'm not liking what I'm reading. It's about impending and emerging financial instability and private financial markets and institutions coming out of what is called the subprime crisis in the United States." Without asking you to delve back into the past, essentially, in the US, out of the property market and the property bubble of the first half of the first decade of this century, there had emerged such an exotic array of financial instruments provided by the banks that no one at the end of the day understood who owed what to whom and who therefore ultimately had to pay the bill. Through what is loosely described as the derivatives market, a vastly inflated property market in America created a series of customers who did not have the money to buy those properties, who were then provided finance by reckless financial institutions, who offset their own risk by selling a range of derivative financial products to financial institutions right around America and right around the world called subprime mortgages, but to the point where no one ultimately knew who was going to pay the bill. This is what triggered the global financial crisis. So I said to Ken, "I don't like what I'm reading. Tell me how we manage a worst-case scenario." This was in January, February of 2008. This is before we had Bear Stearns, the bank in the United States, fall over in March of that year. This was 6 months before we saw Lehman's fall over in the United States. As these things began to unfold, come September of that year, I remember addressing the United Nations General Assembly, where to the general bemusement of my prime ministerial colleagues around the world, I spoke exclusively about the unfolding global economic storm. It worried the hell out of me. Upon returning to Australia from the United States, I convened a cabinet and said, "Well, colleagues, welcome to the second Scullin government." The first Scullin government, for those of you not familiar with Australian political history, was a Labor government elected in 1929, 1 week after the crash. It lasted one term. It was blamed wrongly for what occurred in the global economy at that time. The problem for us in 2008 was that the global economy and global financial markets were infinitely more connected then than they were in the 1930s. So the capacity for financial and economic dominoes to fall one into the other was enormous. That was in September of 2008. Then we came to Black Friday in October of 2008. And for those who have significant financial equities, they will understand the weekend that we're talking about. It was a deep and dark weekend. We sat down as a cabinet and met in Canberra for 2 days straight. I invited the Secretary of the Treasury to explain to us what governments did right and wrong in the 1930s and what we did right and wrong in responding to the recession of the early 1990s. There were two sets of responses to that 2-day-long cabinet seminar. One was our knowledge that if we failed to act by Monday, there would be a run on the banks. I've never had such solicitous telephone calls from the owners of banks in this country as I had over that weekend. I discovered friends I never knew that I had before. In fact, friends that I probably haven't had since, but that's a different matter. I remember also speaking to someone who is well known to many of you in this room, who runs a very large national trucking firm, and as well as a secure money transporting firm around the country. Lindsay Fox said to me, "Mate," this was on the Monday, "I'm glad you did what you've just done, because I had friends of mine ring up and ask me to keep $60 million at a hit in cash in my vans as of Monday morning at 9 o'clock. These were deep and dark days. We had been elected barely 8 months prior to that. We'd been out of office for 12 years prior to that. And with the exception of one or two of us, none of us had served in government before. So the first decision we had to take, which was a large one, for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth, was to provide a Commonwealth guarantee for every single savings deposit in the country, so that the mums and dads would not form queues outside of banks on Monday morning, thereby creating the atmosphere of panic, which then builds on itself. That was an interesting experience, providing a guarantee signed by myself as Prime Minister of the Commonwealth for $1.4 trillion worth of personal savings. The second decision was to provide a guarantee for interbank lending for Australian banks still seeking to obtain flows of finance from international banks. The way in which our banking system works, and I'm sure many of you are familiar, is that flows of finance are constantly occurring each day from one large financial institution in the world to another. That's how ours works in this country too. As Anthony correctly said before, it froze. Not a dollar was being transferred between financial institutions within countries, let alone between, as of the previous Friday. Not a dollar. This did not happen with the great stock market crash of 1987. It did not happen with the great financial crash of Wall Street in 1929. It did happen this time. So the second decision we were required to take, which was ahead of the curve around the world, as in fact was the first, was to provide a sovereign guarantee to Australian banks, Tier 1 banks, and second tier banks as well, for them to sustain their interbank lending from the book of work. Both those decisions were taken, both were announced by me on Sunday, and the nation's financial institutions breathed a sigh of relief. Our banks opened Monday, confidence had been maintained, and in business, confidence is everything. Meantime, around the world, queues emerged outside of banks across Europe and in parts of the United States, as the banking system began to fall in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Belgium, and various other parts of Europe, and as institutions collapsed in the United States as well. That was our first set of decisions. The second was this. We knew, based on what was happening around the world, that what was now unfolding in financial markets would lead through to a real impact on the real economy. Which brings us to the point of Anthony's discussion with the local business community up at JCO's headquarters in Dandenong. Meetings like that happening with many chambers of commerce right around the country. And that is that if the bottom fell out of the economy because the global economy was collapsing, what did we do next? The next set of decisions was directly taken from our experience of both the 30s and the early 90s. Government policy settings on both occasions were wrong. In the 1930s, most spectacularly so. The economic orthodoxy of the Great Depression was that when the global economy, or national economies then, were beginning to dip into recession, then the responsibility of governments was immediately to reduce their expenditure as well. In other words, as private companies collapsed, flows to taxation revenue to national governments also collapsing. The responsibility of national governments then was to contract their own expenditure. Of course, the rest is economic history. You had a double whammy, one reinforcing the other, which turned the stock market crash of 1929 into a global depression which did not relieve really effectively until 1937, and the economic conditions of the late 1930s and mid-1930s accompanying the rise of fascism in Germany and totalitarian movements elsewhere, as people simply lost all form of economic hope. In the early 1990s, we also did not get it right. We were the government at the time. It is not that we contracted the size of government. We did not do that. We didn't repeat that mistake. But in the stimulus which was created in the early 1990s, it was delivered, but came far too late. The problem when the economy collapses is that you need to restore consumption straight away, because consumption represents more than 60% of total final demand in an economy. Unless you've got total final demand, 60% of the economy, continuing to tick away, then frankly the rest will fall apart. So the advice from the Treasury that weekend was, if you're going to try and stop this from happening in Australia, Prime Minister, brackets, and we don't think you can, close brackets, this is what you should consider doing. The stimulus, go early, go hard, go households. Make it targeted, temporary, but also timely. So that meant immediately providing cash payments to households. If we wanted to fill the demand gap, as people kept all their money in their pockets for fear of what they were seeing on their television screens, we had to send out a clear message from government that it was okay to continue to spend. There was no other solution. You could sit up and give pious lectures to consumers and saying, it's okay to still spend, fellas, it's all fine, not quite sure what's going to happen in the future. Or you can do something concrete about it, which is the government putting its money where its mouth was. And so we did. We unleashed direct payments to households in Australia in large numbers. Low-income households, middle-income households, and other households as well. The result was this. I remember in Christmas Eve shopping in Sydney. We were living at Kirribilli at the time. And my wife, Therese, was just returning from the United States because she'd been there on business. She runs her own business. And I was doing what men usually do, which is go out 2 hours before the shops shut on Christmas Eve, thinking, bugger me, I've not bought anything. So I was running around. Shops were full, as they were across most of the country. Therese rang me from Bloomingdale's department store in New York, where she said, it's a ghost town. I'm the only person on this floor on Christmas Eve in downtown New York. You see, what we did was simply send a signal to consumers that you could spend, that the government was going to back them up. And secondly, on top of that, we were sending a message to small business people and retailers, hold on to your staff until January, February so we can have another look and see how it's all going. Whereas around the world, they bulleted them straight away. You know how significant retail is in the employment of our country. And there's further spin-off that comes from retail. 15% of all Australian workers work in retail. You kill that, you kill a large slice of the economy. And then the roll-on effects are huge. And so we rolled out one wave of stimulus after another. That was the short-term immediate effect. The medium-term effect was what we did through some of the buildings that you've seen emerge from the schools of your community here in Anthony's electorate. In this electorate of Holt, $110 million worth of investment in some 52 schools, and the result of which is you have some 27 new libraries, 27 new multi-purpose halls, 17 new libraries, and a bunch of new classrooms. Legacies for the future, by the way. But we knew we could get those built quickly in order to fit the problem of demand in the economy as the crisis rolled on. And we also knew the employment intensity of the construction sector. And And why did we pick schools, apart from the fact that you could leave an important legacy for kids? 21st century libraries, multi-purpose facilities, new classrooms, or the new Trades Training Centre that we've just seen down at Hallam Valley Trades Training Centre, which we invested $10.5 million on, which Anthony and I opened this morning, because the government owns the land. We didn't have any zoning problems. You could whack it up really quick. Okay? Architects were employed, chippies were employed, the rest of the construction industry was employed, and it ran throughout 2009, it ran throughout 2010 and into 2011, and frankly the global economy has gone from dead to half alive to almost alive into this year. And the third thing we did to give a pipeline effect was announce a series of long-term infrastructure investments which would then see the economy through long-term as well, including the National Broadband Network, $47 billion worth of national investment, so that we have ourselves fully wired and plugged into the global economy in the future. That's what we did in terms of our second set of responses, but the final one is this. And it goes back again to what Anthony said before. We know from the data which regions of Australia get hit worst with a recession. You know from the recession of 1991, you know from earlier recessions in the 1980s, where you're going to have the biggest impact in terms of long-term unemployment and immediate unemployment effects. One of them's here, Dandenong, intensity of manufacturing and people basically cutting back as a first response. Not just here, but in the Illawarra, in the Hunter, in all sorts of regional centres and metro centres right around Australia. There's about 35 of them, you can map them. So what we did, and that where this advice from Anthony came in very handy, was we established then local employment coordinators and local employment strategies targeted in these areas, and provided them with extra resources to help people who were being tipped out into unemployment back into work as quickly as possible. And the miracle of this recovery in Australia from this global economic onslaught is that we have not seen out of control unemployment levels in these regional centres across the country. No reason to be complacent, we're not. But this was the third and very local level of what we did. And the reports across the nation from each of these centres, is from each of these local employment coordinators and local employment strategies, has been quite remarkable. We ran jobs fairs across the country where employers would come, where those that lost their jobs would come. We would match people. And frankly, the impact of that is palpable. It was also government saying to these communities, we are with you from day one. In fact, I launched this whole program down in the city of Casey here with Anthony in attendance as Prime Minister, and we rolled it out nationwide. What's my point in saying all this? My point in saying all this is that when, frankly, a certain substance hits the wall in the global economy, there is a fundamental role for government to make a difference, to prevent us from falling into an economic hole. Think of the alternative, which frankly was advocated by our political opponents, which was sit on your hands, do nothing, and the natural business cycle will simply repair itself as it always does. That's what we got wrong in the 30s. Look at Europe today, where many of them did precisely that. And the report card around the world is that, number one, this economy, Australia, the only single major advanced economy in the world which avoided recession. Number two, this economy is now 15% bigger than it was in 2008. The European economy is now the same size as it was in 2008. It hasn't grown. America is now only just growing. Point number three, since 2008, we've generated in this country some 870,000 new jobs, when the major advanced economies have lost 24 million jobs between them. We've added 870,000 jobs. They've lost 24 million. Very few others have actually added any jobs. We've added jobs. Business has added jobs. We've tried to create the economic conditions which made it possible for business to have confidence to invest and to employ people. Number four, the unemployment rate here is 5.4%. The average unemployment rate across all of Europe today is 11.6%. In the United States, it hovers over and above 8%. The history of recessions in the past, and some of you guys in this room are old enough to remember when the last recessions hit, is this. We came out of those recessions with a worse unemployment rate than the rest of the developed world. Not equal to, but worse. This time we've come out with half the unemployment rate of the rest of the developed world. If we had done nothing and generated, therefore, the unemployment levels that you see in Europe, we would have today another 600,000 Australians out of work. You would have 1.3 million Australians on the unemployment scrap heap. You would have regions like this going through a decade-long business cycle-driven recovery process and losing a generation of people to intergenerational unemployment. We didn't have that happen. And because we're working together with the Reserve Bank, monetary policy was relaxed. The cash rate today remains at 3%, half that of the cash rate which we inherited from the Howard government. But notwithstanding the global factors which made that necessary, for an average $300,000 mortgage, that's $100 a week less in terms of mortgage repayments. Put all that together, what's the final report card? Our opponents constantly say, oh, that's terrific. No, actually, they don't say that. They say, what about the debt? And just get ready for this. There'll be one avalanche of negativity from Mr. Abbott for the entire election campaign. What about the debt? This will be the single largest political lie perpetrated in Australian politics. Fact one, Australia's debt in all other countries is measured by one figure alone. It's called net debt to GDP. It is your debt that you owe relative to the size of your economy. What is Australia's? Australia's peaked last year at 9.9% of GDP. The average across the industrial world is about 98% of GDP. That's the first fact. The second is, what does that actually mean? It means that if you are a household and you're earning $100,000 a year, that you've got a $10,000 debt. It means that against interest rates, you're paying probably something in the vicinity of about $500 a year. That is about 0.5% of what you earn. What Mr. Abbott won't do is put any of this into context, and what he will do instead is the ultimate dishonest political act of giving you an absolute number of what debt has risen to. Of course it's bloody well risen. We acted to prevent mass unemployment and the social catastrophe which would have fallen from it and the collapse of businesses across the country. But think one step further. Let's just say we did adopt the Abbott approach, which was to wait for the business cycle to recover. Here is what would have happened. Number one, you would have had, based on international example, unemployment at around 11 or 12%, which means that taxation receipts across Australia, both from personal income tax and from company tax, would have collapsed. Completely and utterly collapsed, at least by that order of magnitude. Secondly, you would have had also a run on the banks, because the Liberals opposed the structure of our guarantee for interbank lending by private financial institutions in this country. So the consequence of all the above would have been a collapse in tax payments, a massive increase in unemployment benefits, paid for by the taxpayer, plus a collapse of financial institutions. The government's budget would have plummeted into deficit under those circumstances. For them to suggest anything to the alternative is a complete and utter lie. Only matched by the complete and utter lie that the net debt levels of the Commonwealth of Australia are in any sense unsustainable. If you're earning $100,000 and you've got a $10,000 debt, imagine you're feeling okay with yourself. If you're earning $100,000 and you've got $500 a year worth of interest payments, I imagine you're feeling okay with yourself. If you're the Commonwealth of Australia and you're on a $1.5 trillion economy and you've got net debt to GDP ratios adding up to 9.9% of that, I imagine we should be feeling okay with ourselves. But the doom and gloom merchants who occupy the opposition benches at the moment don't want you to believe that, because their single political objective is to frighten the living daylights out of you. A triumph of fear over reason, and certainly a triumph of fear over hope. And finally, the international financial community thinks so badly of the Australian economy that we are the only major economy in the world with a AAA credit rating from all three international ratings agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's and Fitch, in the world. I haven't made up a line of what I've just said to you. These are empirical facts. And so therefore the report card of what we have done over the last 5 years is a strong report card. The future's going to require continued work. I'm fully across the challenges. They are large. We've got to maintain macroeconomic stability in an uncertain world. We've got to diversify the economy beyond the commodity sector and the mining sector so that we have other emerging industries in agriculture and manufacturing and across the services industries which will take the burden of growth into the rest of the 21st century. And we can do that. We're smart enough to do that. The kids at Hallam Valley Trades Training Centre will help us do that. The 1,100 kids I spent some time with this morning. These are bright, confident, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kids. And they're all over the country. But to do all that, they need a bit of a message of hope. Not just pie in the sky, be hopeful, but hope based on fact. Facts of the type I've described here today. You're the engine room of making it work. You're the local businesses who employ people. My wife's run a business which she started with half a secretary 22 years ago and now employs 3,000 people around the world. It ain't easy. Paying a paycheck ain't easy. Those of you who have to do it when you're worrying whether the next contract's going to come off or not, I know viscerally what the uncertainty is like. But you know something? You're going to make it work for the country. These young people are going to make it work for the country. And if we can harness the combined energies of a government with a positive vision for the country's economic future, guess what? We'll be cooking with gas. Thank you very much.